A 16th century map shows a continent humans would not find for 300 years. This is the Piri Reis Map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral, and its existence poses a single, baffling question. How could a cartographer of that era possibly chart the coastline of Antarctica, a landmass officially unknown until the 1800s? The map was rediscovered in a Turkish palace library in 1929, and it immediately ignited a firestorm. Scholars saw coastlines that defied all known history, sparking endless debates about lost ancient knowledge and civilizations that may have vanished beneath the ice. By the end of this, you will understand the profound mystery of its sources, from documented naval charts to whispers of maps from the time of Alexander the Great. We will explore how a mix of Portuguese explorers, a possible lost chart from Columbus, and a hint of something far older, all converged in one incredible artifact. What do you believe is truly possible for the ancient world? To understand the map, we must first understand the man who drew it. Admiral Piri Reis was not a backroom dreamer sketching fantasies. He was a seasoned professional, a master of the Mediterranean, born in the coastal city of Gallipoli around 1470. His life was the sea. He rose through the ranks of the formidable Ottoman navy, commanding ships during a period of intense rivalry with the Spanish, the Portuguese, and the Venetian Republic. This was a man who knew currents, coastlines, and the brutal reality of naval warfare firsthand. His expertise was so renowned that he eventually compiled his vast knowledge into a monumental work called the Kitab Letter 1 Bari, or the Book of Navigation. This was not just a simple atlas, it was a detailed sailor's guide to the Mediterranean, filled with stunningly accurate port charts, sailing instructions, and notes on local landmarks and hazards. It became an essential manual for Ottoman captains for centuries. This context is crucial. Piri Reis was a meticulous compiler of practical, usable geographic information. When he sat down to create his world map in 1513, he was doing the same thing on a grander scale. He tells us this himself. In the notes written directly on the map, he lists his sources. He mentions using Portuguese charts from their voyages around Africa, and he makes an astonishing claim. He states he consulted a map used by Christopher Columbus for his journey to the New World. But then he adds another layer, one that sends a chill down the spine of any historian. He says some of the charts he referenced were, in his own words, very old, dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. Think about that for a moment. Here is a respected admiral and scholar, a man who dealt in the concrete realities of navigation, casually mentioning he had access to maps from the 4th century before the Common Era. He presents this not as a wild legend, but as a matter of fact, a piece of his source material. This is the bedrock of the entire mystery. If Piri Reis was the serious cartographer we know him to be, then what exactly were those ancient charts showing? The map itself was a fragment, a ragged piece of parchment that had survived the centuries tucked away in the dusty archives of Istanbul's Topkapi Palace. Its rediscovery in 1929 was almost cinematic. A German theologian named Gustav Adolf Diesmann, tasked with cataloging the palace's non-Islamic manuscripts, was sifting through piles of forgotten documents when he pulled it free. He was immediately struck by its beauty. It was drawn on gazelle skin, a material both durable and fine, covered in rich, colorful illustrations. Here were not just coastlines, but intricate drawings of ships, animals, and even small figures of kings from distant lands. To the untrained eye, it was a magnificent artifact of Ottoman art, but for the historians Diesmann soon called over, it was a geographic time bomb. Their eyes were not drawn to the artistry, but to the landmasses. They instantly recognized the unmistakable, bulging shape of South America's eastern coast, rendered with an accuracy that seemed impossible for a map dated 1513. European knowledge of that coastline was still fragmentary then, and Ferdinand Magellan's circumnavigation, which would definitively chart it, was still years in the future. Yet here it was on an Ottoman map. That alone would have been a monumental find, but then their gaze drifted south below the Atlantic Ocean to a landmass that should not have been there at all. It showed a coastline stretching below South America, a territory free of ice. The scholars knew their history. The continent of Antarctica was not officially sighted until 1820 by a Russian expedition. Its existence was a matter of theory and legend for centuries prior. The ice cap that covers it is millions of years old. So what was this land, labeled on the map, doing on a parchment from the early 1500s? The initial scholarly excitement curdled into profound bewilderment. They were looking at a ghost continent, a place that, according to all accepted history, could not have been mapped by anyone in Piri Reis's time. This single fragment did not just challenge the timeline of exploration, it seemed to tear a hole in it, suggesting a source of knowledge that had vanished from the world. Those marginal notes are not just decoration, they are the map's confession, written in Piri Reis's own hand. To read them is to listen directly to the Admiral explain his work. He states clearly that this is not a map from his own imagination, but a compilation. He lists his sources, a library of charts spread across time and empires. He says he consulted 20 charts and Mappi Mundi, which were medieval world maps. He breaks this down further, specifying 8 maps from the era of Claudius Ptolemy, the great 2nd century Greek geographer, 4 recently drawn Portuguese maps of the newly discovered lands, and 1 Arabic map of the southern regions. This list alone is a treasure trove, showing a mind actively synthesizing the cutting edge of his time with the classical knowledge of antiquity. The Portuguese maps make perfect sense. They were the state-of-the-art for Atlantic exploration. The Ptolemaic maps, while famously flawed in their depiction of the Indian Ocean as a landlocked sea, represented the pinnacle of ancient Greek cartography. But it is the next note, the briefest and most explosive, that changes everything. Piri Reis writes that the coastlines of these lands were drawn from a map in the possession of a Spanish captive, a map that dated back to the time of Alexander the Great. Let that sink in. Alexander the Great lived in the 4th century before the Common Era, over 1,800 years before Piri Reis put ink to parchment. What could such a map possibly have shown? The immediate, tantalizing connection scholars make is to the legendary Library of Alexandria, that vast repository of ancient knowledge said to have held maps from lost voyages. Could a chart from that library, perhaps showing a southern continent theorized by Greek philosophers, have survived the centuries, copied and recopied, to eventually wind up in Ottoman hands? Or was Piri Reis referring to a style of map, a tradition of geography that originated in that distant era? The note is frustratingly vague, yet profoundly specific. He does not say a map showing the world of Alexander, but a map from the time of Alexander. This implies a physical artifact of immense age. For a practical navigator to cite such a source is not a flight of fancy, it is a citation of authority. He is telling us in no uncertain terms that his depiction of these mysterious southern lands was not his invention, but was copied from something unimaginably old. The question then becomes, what did that ancient source actually know? But the map is not just a relic of ancient mysteries, it is also a product of its own time. The most straightforward and widely accepted key to its creation lies in the first source Piri Reis himself listed, the contemporary Portuguese charts. In the early 1500s, Portugal was the undisputed master of Atlantic exploration, its caravels pushing further south and west than any European power before. Their cartographers were producing the most accurate sea charts in the world, closely guarded state secrets detailing newfound lands and trade routes. One navigator in particular, Pedro Alves Cabral, made a fateful discovery. In the year 1500, while leading a fleet to India, Cabral was blown off course by Atlantic currents and cited an unknown coastline. He claimed this land for Portugal, naming it the Island of the True Cross, though we know it today as Brazil. His voyage and the detailed reports and maps that followed provided Europe with its first concrete knowledge of South America's eastern bulge. This is precisely what we see so clearly rendered on the Piri Reis map. The coastline from present-day Brazil down to the Rio de la Plata region matches the Portuguese charts of the time with remarkable fidelity. It shows capes, bays, and river mouths that align with the records of Cabral and later explorers like Amerigo Vespucci. This portion of the map is not mysterious at all. It is a brilliant snapshot of the cutting edge of geographical knowledge in 1513, expertly copied and integrated by a fellow seafarer who understood its value. Think of it this way: the Portuguese had the latest data and Piri Reis, through Ottoman intelligence networks or perhaps captured sailors and maps, obtained it. He was doing what any good admiral would, updating his world picture with the best information available. This grounding in conventional history is vital. It tells us that the map's foundation is solid, empirical, and real. It was not born from pure myth, but that very grounding makes the parts that do not fit so much more perplexing. If the coast of Brazil is drawn from Portuguese sources, what then of the land that continues south from it, the part that looks so hauntingly like Antarctica? That information was not on any known Portuguese chart, so while one source is clearly documented and logical, it only deepens the question of where the rest of the data came from. Yet the most personal and intriguing source Piri Reis names is not a library or a rival empire, but a single man, Christopher Columbus. In his notes, the admiral makes a specific and astonishing claim. He writes that a map of the lands of the West, a map drawn by the hand of Columbus himself, was among the charts he used to compile his work. This is not a vague reference to ancient times. This is a direct citation of a contemporary, albeit legendary, figure. Columbus had died only 7 years earlier in 1506. His voyages had shattered the European worldview, but the detailed maps and logs from his journeys were closely guarded by the Spanish crown, considered state secrets of immense strategic value. So how could an Ottoman admiral possibly get his hands on one? The historical context makes it not only possible but likely. The Mediterranean of the early 1500s was a swirling cauldron of espionage, piracy, and prisoner exchanges. Ottoman and Spanish fleets clashed regularly. Sailors and navigators were captured all the time. It is entirely plausible that a Spanish sailor, perhaps one who had even sailed with Columbus, was taken prisoner and interrogated. His knowledge, or even a physical chart smuggled in a sea chest or memorized and redrawn, would have been a prize of incalculable value for Ottoman intelligence. Piri Reis, as a high-ranking naval commander, would have had direct access to such captives and their confiscated belongings. He was not just a cartographer, he was part of the Ottoman military intelligence apparatus. So the idea that a Columbus map reached Istanbul is far from a fantasy. It is a perfectly logical consequence of the geopolitical struggle of the age. But this raises another fascinating question. Which parts of the Piri Reis map might be this lost Columbus data? Scholars who have pored over the fragment believe they see it in the Caribbean. The depiction of islands like Hispaniola, while stylized, shows a familiarity with their arrangement. More compelling are the coastlines of Central America, which appear on the map as a series of bays and promontories stretching west from the Caribbean. This region was one Columbus explored extensively on his later voyages, but no original maps from his hand survive today. The official Spanish charts derived from his work were kept under lock and key, and many were lost over time. So the Piri Reis map may hold a ghost image, a trace of Columbus' own cartography that has otherwise vanished from history. It is a tantalizing thought that this Turkish map could be preserving a lost piece of the very first European vision of the New World, a vision filtered through the mind of the man who started it all. This connection does not solve the deeper Antarctic mystery, but it adds a crucial layer of credibility. It shows Piri Reis was working with the most advanced first-hand geographical data of his era, data he obtained through the shadowy channels of international rivalry. If his claim about Columbus is true, and the evidence suggests it is, then why would we doubt his other, more ancient citation? But the third source on Piri Reis's list pulls us back centuries before Columbus to the library, not the high seas. He explicitly credits 8 maps from the era of Claudius Ptolemy. Ptolemy was a Greco-Roman scholar who lived in Alexandria during the 2nd century, and his work, the Geographia, was the definitive word on world mapping for over 1,000 years. A typical Ptolemaic world map was a masterpiece of its time, yet profoundly limited by the knowledge of the ancient world. It presented a sprawling, detailed picture of Europe, North Africa, and Asia, all encircled by a vast world ocean. The Mediterranean was rendered with impressive accuracy, a testament to Roman and Greek sailing knowledge, but the farther one traveled from that central sea, the more speculation took over. Africa was often drawn as a landmass that curled eastward to connect with Asia, making the Indian Ocean a giant, landlocked lake. Southeast Asia ballooned into a massive, poorly defined peninsula. The entire concept of the Americas, of course, was completely absent. So when Piri Reis says he used Ptolemaic maps, we should see their fingerprints on the parts of his work that depict the Old World. And indeed, scholars believe we can look at his rendering of Africa. While the west coast follows the newer Portuguese charts, the southern tip and the east coast show a more schematic, less accurate shape. This could very well be the ghost of Ptolemy's geography, a blending of new Portuguese data with ancient, inherited outlines. The Indian Ocean region on the fragment might also show traces of that classical idea of an enclosed sea. Yet here is where the mystery twists and deepens. If Piri Reis was faithfully copying Ptolemy for the Old World, why does he abandon him completely for the New World? Ptolemy had no knowledge of the Americas or a southern continent. Those sections of the Piri Reis map come from nowhere in the classical tradition. This creates a fascinating schism in the document. One part of the map is a palimpsest, a layer of ancient Greek geography peeking through. The other part is a clean, startlingly modern insert of lands unknown to the ancients. This isn't a simple case of a cartographer copying an old map. It's the work of a synthesizer carefully selecting data from different streams of knowledge. He uses Ptolemy where Ptolemy is the best source available for the familiar contours of the Mediterranean world. But for the astonishing new coastlines in the west and south, he switches sources entirely to the Portuguese, and he claims to something even older than Ptolemy. This selective accuracy is the mark of a true scholar, not a copyist. It tells us he knew the limitations of his sources. He knew Ptolemy was wrong about the Indian Ocean, so he corrected it with Arabic or Portuguese charts. And he knew Ptolemy had nothing to say about the lands across the Atlantic, so he went elsewhere. That elsewhere is the true heart of the puzzle. If it wasn't Ptolemy and it wasn't fully from the Portuguese, then what ancient source, lost to history, contained a geography that Ptolemy himself never imagined? The fourth source on that list is perhaps the most elusive, a single Arabic map of the southern regions. This brief mention opens a door to an entire world of forgotten exploration. While Europe slumbered through its so-called Dark Ages, the Islamic world was experiencing a golden age of science and geography. Arab and Persian scholars were not just preserving ancient Greek knowledge, they were revolutionizing it. They built observatories, perfected the astrolabe for navigation, and produced maps of stunning sophistication. The most famous of these cartographers was Al-Idrisi, a 12th century scholar working in the court of the Norman king Roger II of Sicily. His great work, the Tabula Rogeriana, was compiled from decades of traveler reports and merchant logs. It presented a world far more accurate than any European map of the time, especially for Africa and the Indian Ocean. Arab dhows were the masters of those waters, trading from Zanzibar to Canton. Their pilots knew the monsoon winds like the back of their hand and charted coastlines with a precision that would not be matched in Europe for centuries. So when Piri Reis cites an Arabic map, he is tapping into this deep, empirical tradition of observation and trade. But what could this specific map of the southern regions have shown? The phrase suggests a focus on the Indian Ocean and the coast of Africa below the equator, areas well documented by Arab sailors. Yet there are persistent whispers in historical records that some Arab traders ventured much, much further. Could their dhows have been caught by the same equatorial currents that would later carry Portuguese caravels to Brazil? There are tantalizing, if fragmentary, accounts. The legendary Arab navigator Ibn Majid wrote of voyages into the Sea of Darkness, the Atlantic west of Africa. Some medieval Arabic texts speak of islands far to the west, like the mythical Al-Maghrib al-Aqsa, the farthest west. Were these just legends, or were they based on real, if rare, landfalls? If an Arab ship was blown off course and sighted the eastern bulge of South America, that knowledge would have been a priceless trade secret, recorded on a chart for only the most experienced captains. This single Arabic map in Piri Reis's possession might have been such a document, a rare artifact showing not just the familiar trade routes of the Indian Ocean, but a tentative, speculative coastline in the far western Atlantic. It would have been the perfect bridge in the Admiral's mind, connecting the solid Portuguese data of Brazil with the need to depict something continuing southward. Perhaps this map did not show Antarctica as we know it, but rather a theoretical great southern land, a place where all the unknown waters were thought to end. The Arabic geographical tradition was deeply influenced by Ptolemy, but also by their own practical experience. They knew the world was round, and they theorized about the lands that must exist in the southern hemisphere to balance it. So the land on Piri Reis's map, the one that seems to mirror Antarctica, may be a composite, a brilliant and mistaken synthesis. He may have taken the solid Portuguese outline of Brazil's coast, connected it to the speculative southern continent on an ancient Greek or Arabic map, and drawn what he believed was a continuous coastline. In this light, the map is not a literal snapshot of an ice-free Antarctica, but a breathtaking historical collision, a moment where hard-won Portuguese discovery, sophisticated Arabic cartography, and ancient Greek theory all converged on a single sheet of gazelle skin. The result was a map that was partly stunningly accurate, partly educated guesswork, and entirely revolutionary. Yet this brings us to the source that overshadows all others, the one that feels less like history and more like myth. Piri Reis's mention of a map from the time of Alexander the Great is the magnet for all the mystery. Was he referring to a literal, physical chart from the 4th century before the Common Era, or was this a legend he himself believed? To even consider the possibility, we must journey to the most famous repository of ancient knowledge the world has ever known, the Great Library of Alexandria. Founded in the 3rd century before the Common Era, it was designed to collect all the wisdom of the known world. Scholars there gathered texts from across the Mediterranean, from India, and from the caravans of Central Asia. They did not just store books, they copied, translated, and synthesized. It is entirely plausible, even likely, that the library's holdings included maps and navigational logs from Phoenician, Egyptian, and Greek explorers, records of voyages whose details have since been lost to time. The tragic burning of the library, a slow decline over centuries, represents one of history's greatest cultural catastrophes. Countless unique documents vanished. But the idea that all its knowledge perished is too simple. In the centuries before its final destruction, copies of its most important works were made and dispersed. Byzantine monasteries and later the great translation houses of the Islamic caliphates in Baghdad and Cordoba became new arks for this ancient learning. Greek texts, including geographical works, were translated into Arabic, studied, and expanded upon, so the chain of transmission, while fragile, is conceivable. A map or geographical treatise from the era of Alexander could have been copied in Alexandria. That copy could have traveled to Constantinople, and centuries later, Arabic scholars translating Greek works in Baghdad could have encountered it. From there, it could have entered the wider Islamic world of learning, eventually reaching the Ottoman Empire. This is not a proven path, but it is a historically possible one. It suggests Piri Reis might have had access to a document that was a medieval copy of an ancient original. Its origins blurred, but its core geographic data preserved. The question then becomes, what could that ancient data have been? The Greeks were brilliant theorists. Philosophers like Aristotle argued for a spherical Earth and speculated that a large southern landmass must exist to balance the northern continents, a place they called Terra Australis Incognita. This was not mapped knowledge, but philosophical deduction. Could a later Greek or Roman mapmaker, inspired by this theory, have drawn a speculative southern continent? If such a map existed in Alexandria and a copy survived, it might have shown a great land at the bottom of the world, a blank space labeled Terra Incognita. This is precisely what many scholars believe the southern landmass on the Piri Reis map represents, not a chart of Antarctica's true coastline, but the ancient Greek idea of Antarctica, passed down and mistakenly connected to the real coast of South America. It is a compelling, elegant solution, yet it leaves a nagging discomfort. Piri Reis was a practical man. He cited Portuguese charts for their accuracy. He sought out a map from Columbus for its first-hand authority. Would he have given equal weight to a purely theoretical drawing from antiquity? Perhaps he would have, if that ancient map contained details that matched the new Portuguese reports in startling ways, suggesting it was based on more than just theory. This is the tantalizing crack in the door. What if the ancient source was not just speculation? What if it contained records, however fragmented, of a voyage that actually happened? The Greeks told stories of distant lands. The historian Herodotus wrote of Phoenician sailors who circumnavigated Africa. Could a ship from the Mediterranean have been blown across the Atlantic in antiquity? It is not impossible. The currents and winds can, on rare occasion, create a one-way passage. If such a voyage occurred and a survivor's account or a crude sketch made it back to Alexandria, it would have been the stuff of legend, a curious artifact filed away. Its existence would explain nothing, and yet it would explain everything. It would mean Piri Reis's most controversial source was not a philosophical myth, but a ghost, a faded memory of a real journey that the world had forgotten. We are left then with two equally powerful visions. One is of a brilliant synthesis where a 16th century admiral combined the latest discoveries with ancient theories to create a map that seems to prophesy a continent. The other is of a whisper down the ages, a fragment of lost exploration that somehow survived the burning of libraries and the fall of empires to end up in his hands. Which story feels true to you? The accuracy of South America on the Piri Reis map is not just impressive, it is unnerving. Look closely at the eastern coastline, that great bulging curve from present-day Brazil down towards the southern tip. The width of the continent from east to west is rendered with a precision that feels out of place in a map from 1513. This is not a vague, squiggly guess at a new land, it is a measured depiction. For a cartographer of that era to get the longitudinal span so correct is a feat that required more than just a sailor's rough sketch from a ship's deck. It implies the use of a source map that employed some form of triangulation or astronomical observation to calculate distances, a level of technical sophistication associated with later, more systematic surveys. Then there are the mountains. Inland from the coast, Piri Reis drew a range running north to south, and next to it he placed a curious annotation. He drew a strange, long-necked animal and labeled it. He called it a llama. This single detail sends a shockwave through the conventional narrative. Portuguese explorers of the time, like Cabral or Vespucci, primarily hugged the coastline. They made landfall, traded, and mapped the bays and river mouths. They did not trek inland across thousands of miles of dense jungle and treacherous terrain to document the high Andes and its unique fauna. The llama is an animal exclusive to the high altitudes of the western side of the continent, a creature those early coastal visitors would have almost certainly never seen or heard of. So how did it get on Piri Reis's map? The explanation forces us to reconsider the timeline of exploration. It suggests his source for South America was not a simple Portuguese coastal chart, but something far more comprehensive. It hints at a map drawn by someone or some group that possessed a startlingly complete geographical understanding of the continent's interior features, not just its shoreline. This could point to a lost expedition, one that penetrated deep into the land, perhaps following the great river systems, and returned with detailed observations that were later compiled. Or, more controversially, it suggests the knowledge was much older, inherited from a source that had mapped the continent long before the Portuguese caravels arrived. The llama is not a decorative flourish, it is a data point. It is a tiny, inked confession that the mapmaker had access to information that, according to all official records, simply did not exist in his world. This level of internal detail makes the southern landmass attached to it even more perplexing. If the source was so meticulously accurate for the known parts, could its depiction of the unknown parts be equally trustworthy? But this incredible accuracy in one area makes the glaring inaccuracies in another all the more baffling. Shift your gaze north from the detailed coast of Brazil up into the Caribbean Sea. Here, the map seems to lose its confidence. The islands are present, but they are distorted, almost dreamlike in their arrangement. Scholars squinting at the parchment believe they can identify the large, misshapen landmass of Cuba, the island of Hispaniola, and perhaps a suggestion of Puerto Rico. Yet they are not drawn as distinct, separate islands with clear coastlines. Instead, they appear as a confused cluster, their shapes blunted and their positions relative to each other skewed. It is as if the cartographer knew these lands were there, but could not quite picture how they fit together. This stark contrast is the key to understanding Piri Reis's method. The precise, wide curve of South America came from a high-quality, likely Portuguese source. The muddled Caribbean, however, points to a different, far cruder origin. Many historians see this as the fingerprint of the very source Piri Reis himself cited, the lost map of Christopher Columbus. Think about what that map might have been. Columbus was not a professional cartographer. He was an explorer operating on a mixture of dead reckoning, celestial guesses, and sheer determination. His own logs are filled with miscalculations about distances and latitudes. A map drawn by his hand or by a member of his crew would have been a working document, a rough sketch of newfound lands meant for his royal patrons. It would have captured the idea of the islands, their general location and size, but not their exact cartographic precision. If such a map fell into Ottoman hands, perhaps from a captured sailor who had served on a later expedition, it would have been a treasure trove of strategic intelligence, but a nightmare for a cartographer trying to reconcile it with other, better charts. Piri Reis would have faced a dilemma. He had this crude, first-hand account from the man who discovered the New World, but its geography was messy. He also had the clean, accurate Portuguese charts of the South American coast, which did not extend into the Caribbean. So what did he do? He did what any compiler would. He used both. He placed the rough Columbus data where he believed it belonged, north of the precise Portuguese data, and did his best to connect the dots. The result is a map of two different realities existing side by side, a testament to the patchwork nature of 16th century knowledge. One part of the world is drawn with the clarity of a satellite image, the other with the vague gestures of a rumor. This isn't a mistake, it's a historical snapshot. It shows us the moment when hard, surveyed knowledge collided with the raw, unprocessed data of discovery, all filtered through the mind of an admiral trying to make sense of a world that was suddenly and bewilderingly twice as large as he had been taught. This southern landmass, clinging to the map like a phantom limb, is where speculation ignites into full flame. On the Piri Reis fragment, it is not shown as a separate, distant continent. It is drawn as a direct, continuous extension of the South American coastline, curling eastward below the Atlantic. To the modern eye, trained on our satellite maps, this looks like a catastrophic error. South America ends at Cape Horn, and then there is only the frigid, storm-racked Drake Passage for hundreds of miles before Antarctica begins. The two continents are not connected. So what was Piri Reis depicting? For centuries, this was dismissed as a simple cartographic mistake, a guess about the unknown southern reaches of the New World. That changed dramatically in the mid-20th century when a history professor named Charles Hapgood looked at the map not as a mistake, but as a potential revelation. Hapgood was not a mainstream academic, but a bold, interdisciplinary thinker. He proposed a theory so radical it sent shockwaves through both history and geology. He argued that the southern landmass on the Piri Reis map was not a guess at all. It was, he claimed, the literal ice-free coastline of Antarctica, specifically a region called Queen Maud Land, mapped in remote antiquity. His evidence was as meticulous as it was controversial. In the 1960s, Hapgood worked with United States Air Force cartographers to compare the Piri Reis coastline to seismic survey maps of the bedrock beneath the Antarctic ice cap. These surveys, using new sonar technology, had recently revealed the true shape of the continent under miles of glacial cover. The comparison, Hapgood asserted, was staggering. The bends, bays, and promontories on the ancient Ottoman map seemed to align not with the modern, icy outline of Antarctica, but with the shape of the continent's hidden bedrock. It was as if the map was showing the land not as it is today, but as it was when it was last free of ice. This led to an even more profound and unsettling conclusion. Geological evidence suggests that the last time Queen Maud Land was ice-free was not thousands, but millions of years ago, in a warm period of the Earth's deep past. If Hapgood's interpretation was correct, then the source map Piri Reis used must have been drafted by a civilization capable of advanced cartography at a time when humanity, according to all orthodox science, did not yet exist. This was the ultimate forbidden coastline, a geography that should have been impossible for any human to record. Hapgood's theory gave terrifying weight to Piri Reis's own note about maps from the time of Alexander the Great. Perhaps those were merely the most recent copies. The original source, he suggested, was far older, a legacy from a lost global civilization that mastered the seas and mapped the world before a cataclysm, perhaps the end of the last ice age, buried their achievements under glaciers and ocean silt. The idea is intoxicating. It transforms the map from a curious artifact into a potential message in a bottle, tossed across millennia. It suggests our history is a palimpsest, a parchment where a much older story has been only partially erased, waiting for a curious mind to decipher its faint, impossible lines. Charles Hapgood needed a mechanism, a way to explain how Antarctica could have been mapped ice-free. His answer was as grand as it was unorthodox, a concept he called Earth crust displacement. Forget the slow drift of tectonic plates over millions of years. Hapgood proposed something far more dramatic and sudden. He imagined the entire outer shell of the planet, the crust, slipping as a single unit over the molten mantle beneath, like the loose skin of an orange shifting around the fruit inside. In this cataclysmic event, whole continents could relocate to new latitudes in a relatively short geological time. According to his model, around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, Antarctica was not situated at the South Pole. Instead, it was positioned much farther north in a temperate climate zone, perhaps comparable to the latitude of present-day Argentina or New Zealand. Its coasts were green, its rivers flowed, and it was habitable. A civilization, perhaps one now lost to history, could have sailed along its shores and charted its contours. Then the displacement occurred. The crust shifted, sliding the entire continent into its current, frozen polar prison, locking its once accessible coastline under miles of accumulating ice. This theory, Hapgood argued, was the master key. It explained why the Piri Reis Maps seem to show a land that, in our time, has been buried for millennia. The map was not a prophecy of a future discovery, but a relic of a past geography, a snapshot of a world that literally moved. To lend credibility to this fringe idea, Hapgood sought and received a remarkable endorsement. He corresponded with Albert Einstein in the early 1950s, sharing his manuscript. Einstein, fascinated by the geological implications, wrote a supportive foreword to Hapgood's later book. He stated that Hapgood's idea was not contradicted by any solid facts, and that the shifting of the crust was a credible and serious hypothesis worthy of further investigation. This was not a full endorsement of lost civilizations, but a nod to the geological mechanism itself. Einstein's approval gave the theory a veneer of scientific plausibility it would have otherwise lacked, transforming it from pure fantasy into a controversial but discussable model of Earth's history. It suggested that our planet's past might be far more volatile and strange than traditional geology allowed. If Einstein found the crust displacement idea plausible, who were we to dismiss it outright? This alliance of a rogue historian and the century's greatest physicist created a powerful narrative, one that offered a seemingly scientific foundation for the map's greatest mystery. It provided a stage, a specific time, and a possible climate where an advanced ancient culture could have performed the impossible feat of mapping a continent we only found centuries later. The theory wrapped the enigma in a tantalizing package of cataclysm and lost glory, answering the how with a planetary convulsion, and the who with a civilization erased by the same event that froze their greatest achievement into obscurity. Yet the story of Piri Reis is not a lonely one. His map stands as the most famous piece in a scattered puzzle, a collection of charts that defy their own time. If we shift our gaze just 18 years forward to 1531, we encounter another document that deepens the mystery exponentially. It is a world map created by a French mathematician and cartographer named Orontius Phineas. At first glance, it is a product of its Renaissance era, filled with the artistic flourishes and theological symbolism common to the period. But look closer at the southern extreme of the map. There, drawn with startling clarity, is a massive landmass. It is not a vague, theoretical blob. It is a detailed continent positioned roughly where Antarctica sits today. The coastline is jagged and complex, featuring deep bays, prominent peninsulas, and most astonishingly, a network of rivers flowing from a mountainous interior out to the sea. This detail is the bombshell. Rivers cannot flow on the surface of modern Antarctica, a continent buried under ice up to 3 miles thick. The Orontius Phineas map does not show a frozen wasteland. It depicts a land that appears to be in a state of glacial retreat, with ice caps at the poles but open, habitable land and flowing waterways in between. How could a 16th century scholar, decades before any official citing, produce such a specific and geographically coherent vision of a continent that, in his reality, did not exist? The chilling implication is that Phineas, like Piri Reis, was not inventing. He was copying. He was working from source materials that portrayed Antarctica not as a hypothesis, but as a mapped reality, complete with its hydrological features. This moves us from a single anomaly into the realm of a pattern. These two maps, created by men from different cultures 18 years apart, seem to be independent reports from the same lost source. And the pattern widens further. There is the Haji Ahmed map of 1559, which shows a land bridge connecting Siberia and Alaska with an accuracy that matches modern sonar readings of the Bering Sea floor. There is the Buach map of the 18th century, allegedly based on ancient Greek sources, which depicts Antarctica as two large landmasses separated by a frozen sea, a configuration that intriguingly resembles the subglacial topography we now know exists beneath the ice. These are not simple mistakes, they are specific, technical, and they consistently point to geographical knowledge that should have been impossible for their creators to possess. This collective evidence suggests that Piri Reis was not a singular genius stumbling upon one secret. He was part of a tradition, a fragmented echo of a much older cartographic science. Medieval and Renaissance mapmakers from Istanbul to Paris appear to have occasionally tapped into a common well of ancient data. They were like scribes in a dark age, copying fragments of a master text they only partially understood, preserving coastlines and mountain ranges whose true origins had been lost to time. This was a source tradition that spoke of a world fully mapped, of continents explored and charted long before the age of European sail. The maps themselves become ghosts, haunting our history books with the silhouette of a civilization, or perhaps a network of civilizations that achieved a global perspective and then vanished, leaving only these cryptic copies as proof of their journey. So we are left with a question far larger than any single parchment. If this lost source tradition is real, who created the original maps? What manner of explorers, with what tools and knowledge, walked those riverbanks in Antarctica and sailed those vanished straits, and why did their world disappear from memory? The whispers of lost civilizations are compelling, but they crash against a formidable wall of academic consensus. For every voice that sees an impossible coastline, a dozen others see a perfectly understandable mistake. Mainstream historians and cartographers offer a far less dramatic, but arguably more grounded, explanation for the map's greatest mystery. They argue that the southern landmass is not Antarctica at all, but a cartographic phantom known as Terra Australis Incognita. This was the great unknown southern land, a theoretical continent that had existed on maps since the time of the ancient Greeks. Philosophers like Aristotle reasoned that the large landmasses of the northern hemisphere must be balanced by a similar mass in the south to keep the world stable. This idea persisted for centuries, a blank space on the map labeled simply unknown southern land. By the Renaissance, every educated cartographer knew of this concept. When Portuguese explorers began returning with reports of a vast land south of the Atlantic, it was the most natural thing in the world for a mapmaker like Piri Reis to connect those new reports to that ancient theory. He was not mapping a real continent he had data for, he was fulfilling a philosophical expectation, sketching in the legendary southern land where he believed it must logically be. The critics dismantle the romantic theory point by precise point. First and most damningly, the Piri Reis map shows no Drake Passage. This is the crucial, stormy sea that separates the tip of South America from the Antarctic Peninsula. On the fragment, the southern land is drawn as a direct, unbroken continuation of the South American coastline. If Piri Reis truly had an ancient source showing the real Antarctica, that source would have known these were two distinct continents divided by a major body of water. Its absence suggests the mapmaker simply did not know the geography ended there, so he extended the line, guessing at what lay beyond the edge of the known world. Second, the critics challenge the very notion of the coastline's accuracy. They argue that comparing the stylized, hand-drawn line on a 16th century parchment to a modern seismic bedrock map is an exercise in selective interpretation. The human mind is pattern-seeking. If you look at any two complex, wiggly lines long enough, you can find points where they seem to align. The critics contend that Hapgood and his supporters engaged in a form of cartographic pareidolia, seeing a meaningful match in what is essentially a coincidence of squiggles. They emphasize that the Piri Reis coastline is not a precise, surveyed outline, it is an artistic rendering. Its bends and bays are the generic conventions of the era, the same kind of stylized curls you see on other parts of the map where no mystery exists. Perhaps the most straightforward explanation is that the mysterious land is not a continent, but a misdrawn and wildly exaggerated version of a real place much closer to home, Patagonia. Early explorers to the southern tip of South America brought back tales of a harsh, gigantic land. The very name Patagonia comes from legends of a race of giant people. To a cartographer sitting in Istanbul, receiving second or third-hand reports of this vast, cold, and poorly understood region, it would have been easy to inflate its size and significance. What if the southern landmass is simply Patagonia, stretched eastward into the ocean to fit the available space on the parchment and to connect with the idea of Terra Australis? This would explain why it appears attached to South America, why its depiction is so vague, and why it lacks any of the defining features of the true Antarctic coastline. In this light, the map is not a repository of advanced knowledge, but a beautiful testament to the limits of knowledge. It shows us a brilliant mind grappling with fragments of data, trying to assemble a coherent picture of a world that was still mostly shadow. The llama in the mountains proves he had good sources for some things. The confused Caribbean proves his sources were flawed for others, and the phantom southern continent may simply prove that even the greatest admirers of the age were still filling in the blanks with the myths and theories of their time. So we stand at a crossroads between two visions. One is a map that contains a secret from before history. The other is a map that is a perfect product of its own history, errors and all. Which story you believe may depend less on the ink on the parchment and more on what you believe is possible in the forgotten corridors of time. This brings us to a hidden technical flaw in the theory, a problem so profound it nearly shatters the idea of an ancient source. The phantom continent is one thing, but the map may contain a far quieter, more devastating anachronism. Look at the positions of South America and Africa relative to each other. If the map is genuinely accurate in its broader layout, then it doesn't just show coastlines, it places them correctly east to west across the vast emptiness of the Atlantic Ocean. That is the problem of longitude. Latitude, your north-south position, is relatively easy to find. You can measure it by the height of the sun or the North Star above the horizon. Ancient sailors from the Phoenicians to the Polynesians mastered this, but longitude, your east-west position, is a demon of a different kind. To know how far east or west you are, you need to know the precise time difference between your current location and a fixed starting point like your home port. If you are off by just 4 minutes in your timekeeping, you will be off by a full degree of longitude, which at the equator equals a catastrophic 60 nautical miles of error. For centuries, this was the great unsolvable puzzle of navigation. Ships would sail north or south to the correct latitude, then turn east or west and simply hope for the best, a method called running down the latitude that led to countless shipwrecks and missed landfalls. The solution required a clock that could keep perfect time on a rolling, salty, temperature-swinging ship for months on end. This was not achieved until the mid-1700s with John Harrison's marine chronometer. So, if the Piri Reis map accurately plots the longitudinal span of the Atlantic, showing South America positioned correctly west of Africa, it implies its original source maker possessed a solution to the longitude problem thousands of years before Harrison. Think about the implications. It means that lost civilization would have needed either an impossibly accurate mechanical timekeeper, something far beyond even the finest Renaissance clocks, or a method of celestial navigation so advanced it used the motions of the moons of Jupiter or the precise timing of lunar eclipses, techniques that were only developed in the scientific revolution. This is not just about having ships. This is about having an entire supporting framework of astronomy, mathematics, and precision engineering that leaves no other trace in the archaeological record. It suggests a technological leap that makes the pyramids look simple. This single, silent detail, the potential accurate placement of continents across an ocean, is perhaps the strongest argument against the ancient advanced civilization theory. It asks us to believe not just in explorers, but in a society that solved one of humanity's most persistent technical nightmares, and then vanished without a whisper, leaving behind only a few coppered coastlines on a handful of mysterious maps. The longitude problem stands as a towering wall between speculation and history. To accept the map as a literal artifact of prehistory, you must first explain how its creators conquered time itself. So if a lost civilization is the answer, who were they? The map's mystery has birthed a gallery of shadowy candidates, each one a reflection of our deepest historical fantasies. The most famous, of course, is Atlantis, Plato's story of a mighty island empire that sank beneath the waves in a single day and night has been grafted onto the Piri Reis map for decades. Proponents argue that a seafaring culture with Atlantean technology could have mapped the world before its catastrophic demise, and that fragments of its knowledge survived in Egyptian or Phoenician archives, eventually trickling down to Piri Reis. It is a seductive idea, a perfect fit for a map that seems to hold drowned knowledge. Yet Atlantis is fundamentally a philosophical allegory from Plato, a tale about hubris and the fall of ideal states. There is no archaeological evidence for a Bronze Age empire capable of global exploration, and no clear mechanism for how its specific cartographic data would survive over 9,000 years to reach a Turkish admiral. Atlantis serves more as a powerful symbol of lost grandeur than a verifiable historical source. A more grounded, though still speculative, candidate is a sophisticated Ice Age culture. Imagine the world 18,000 years ago at the peak of the last glacial maximum. So much of the planet's water was locked in ice that global sea levels were over 300 feet lower than they are today. Vast stretches of continental shelf now under the waves were dry, fertile land. Entire regions like the Sunda Shelf connecting Southeast Asia into a larger landmass called Sunderland, or the Bering Land Bridge between Siberia and Alaska, were open for habitation. The North Sea was a grassy plain. Could a maritime civilization have risen along these now drowned coastlines? A people who built not with stone monuments, but with wood and reed boats, who followed the shorelines as they hunted and traded. Their world would have been a network of rich river valleys and sheltered lagoons that are now at the bottom of the sea. Their exploration would have been a necessity, a way of life along the extended coastline of a colder, drier planet. If such a culture existed and developed basic celestial navigation, they could have charted continents in their Ice Age configurations, mapping shorelines that would later vanish as the glaciers melted and the oceans rose. This theory offers a plausible stage and a motive. The cataclysm was not a sudden sinking, but a slow, inexorable drowning over centuries, a creeping flood that would have forced migrations, erased homelands, and scattered survivors who carried fragmented stories and perhaps precious copies of ancestral maps. These survivors could have passed their knowledge to emerging Neolithic cultures, becoming the seed for global flood myths and just maybe the source of those very old charts. Then there is the most controversial suggestion, one that steps entirely outside conventional history. Some look at the longitudinal precision and the apparent antiquity of the data and propose an extraterrestrial origin. The idea is that ancient astronauts visited Earth, surveyed the planet from above, and left behind cartographic knowledge that was preserved by priestly castes. This is often treated lightly by serious researchers, as it essentially replaces one mystery with an even larger one and removes all human agency from the story. It also fails a basic test of logic. If an advanced alien species went to the trouble of mapping Earth, why would they provide only fragmented, ambiguous coastlines on a parchment? Why not leave behind the equivalent of a satellite photo etched in titanium? The theory feels less like an explanation and more like a surrender to the inexplicable. Perhaps the most compelling idea is not of a single empire like Atlantis, but of a diffuse, interconnected maritime network. Think of the Polynesians who mastered the Pacific Ocean using star paths, wave patterns, and bird migrations, settling islands across thousands of miles of open water without written maps as we know them. Their knowledge was oral and experiential, passed down through generations of navigators. Now project that concept onto a global scale during the Ice Age. Different coastal peoples from the Atlantic to the Pacific could have developed similar advanced wayfinding skills. Through rare but meaningful long-distance voyages or through chains of contact along coastlines, geographic knowledge could have been slowly exchanged and synthesized over millennia. A map from this tradition would not be a single survey from a central authority, but a cumulative patchwork, a slow assembly of the world's coastline piece by piece over generations. This network would have had no capital city, no emperor to overthrow. Its collapse would have been silent, caused by the rising seas fragmenting its coastal home bases and disrupting its routes. The legacy of such a civilization would not be pyramids but profound, scattered echoes in myth and in a few stubbornly accurate lines on a handful of ancient maps. This vision asks us to expand our definition of civilization beyond cities and kings, to consider the possibility of a world once knit together not by roads, but by sea routes and by a shared, hard-won understanding of a planet that was soon to be utterly transformed by melting ice. But the search for a source does not always require us to leap into myth or deep time. There is another, far more plausible candidate, one already whispered by the ancient Greeks themselves. The Phoenicians, for centuries before the rise of Greece and Rome, these master mariners from the coast of modern-day Lebanon dominated the Mediterranean. They were not just traders, they were explorers of legendary skill, founding colonies from Carthage in North Africa to Cadiz in Spain. Their ships, sturdy and deep-hulled, were built for long voyages beyond the sight of land. The Greek historian Herodotus records an astonishing feat that Phoenician sailors, commissioned by an Egyptian pharaoh, successfully circumnavigated the entire continent of Africa. If they could sail around Africa, is it so unthinkable that one of their ships, caught in the powerful Canary Current off the coast of West Africa, could have been swept across the Atlantic? The currents and trade winds form a natural conveyor belt from the Canary Islands to the Caribbean and the northeastern bulge of Brazil. A Phoenician vessel, perhaps blown off course in a storm, could have made that journey in a matter of weeks, a one-way trip into a new world. The crew would have landed, surveyed the coast, and perhaps left some mark of their passage before attempting, likely unsuccessfully, the far more difficult voyage back against the prevailing winds and currents. This is not wild speculation, it is a navigationally sound scenario, and if it happened even once, that knowledge would have been a secret of immense value, recorded on a chart and stored in the great libraries of Tyre or, more likely, Carthage. When Rome destroyed Carthage in 146 before the Common Era, they famously burned the city for days. Yet classical sources also say the Romans confiscated Carthaginian libraries and gave the texts to their allied kingdoms in North Africa. Some of that knowledge could have easily found its way to the scholarly hub of Alexandria, entering the stream of classical geography that later scholars like Ptolemy would draw upon. This provides a clean historical pipeline, a Phoenician voyage to Brazil around 500 before the Common Era, a chart deposited in Carthage, that chart copied and sent to Alexandria after Carthage's fall, preserved and recopied for centuries, eventually referenced by an Arabic or Byzantine scholar, and finally reaching the desk of Piri Reis. It is a long chain, but every link is historically plausible. The evidence, however, gets more controversial. In 1872, a stone was reportedly found on a plantation in Paraíba, Brazil. It bore an inscription in a script that looked remarkably Phoenician. The text told a tragic story of 10 Phoenician ships separated from a larger fleet, landing on a hostile shore and sacrificing a young boy to the gods. Scholars immediately declared it a forgery, and for good reason. The 19th century was rife with hoaxes meant to prove pre-Columbian contact. Yet, over a century later, linguistic analysis by some experts has shown the script and grammar to be authentically ancient Phoenician, of a dialect that would have been virtually impossible for a 19th-century forger to replicate. The stone itself has been lost, leaving only copies of the inscription, so its authenticity remains fiercely debated. But if it is real, it is a smoking gun, a first-hand account of exactly the kind of accidental voyage the currents suggest. Even without the stone, the cultural echoes are intriguing. Why do colossal stone heads created by the Olmec civilization of ancient Mexico, dating to around 900 before the Common Era, bear such striking stylistic resemblance to statues from the ancient Levant? Why do certain Mesoamerican pyramid designs recall the step pyramids of Mesopotamia? These are questions that mainstream archaeology dismisses as coincidence, the independent invention of similar forms. But when layered atop the navigational possibility and the faint textual hint of the Paraíba stone, they form a compelling pattern of maybe. The Phoenician hypothesis offers a powerful middle path. It does not require an unknown super-civilization. It uses a known, historically documented seafaring culture operating at the right time. It provides a believable mechanism for a transatlantic crossing. And it establishes a credible, if fragile, chain of custody for that knowledge to survive into the Renaissance. It suggests the source of Piri Reis's southern coastline may not have been a map of Antarctica, but a much older, cruder chart of the eastern coast of South America, drawn by Phoenicians who thought they had found the edge of the world. In this light, the map is not a prophecy but a fossil, preserving the first, fleeting human glimpse of a continent. A glimpse that was then forgotten by everyone except the copyists who kept the line alive on parchment for 2,000 years. So we must ask, is the truth more extraordinary than fiction, or is it simply a forgotten chapter of it? There is another contender in this race across time, a fleet so vast it makes the Portuguese caravels look like fishing boats. In the early 15th century, decades before Columbus or even Prince Henry the Navigator's school was fully established, the Ming dynasty of China launched a series of naval expeditions of staggering scale. Commanded by the Muslim eunuch Admiral Zheng He, these treasure fleets were floating cities. The largest ships stretched over 400 feet long, with 9 masts and multiple decks, carrying thousands of sailors, soldiers, and scholars. Their official mission was to project Chinese power and collect tribute, and historical records confirm they sailed as far as the Swahili coast of East Africa. But what if they went further? This is the heart of a modern theory that seeks to solve the Piri Reis enigma, not with ancient Phoenicians or lost Ice Age cultures, but with a documented, sophisticated Asian power operating just a century before the map was drawn. The proposal, popularized by author Gavin Menzies, is audacious. He argues that Zheng He's fleets did not stop in Africa. Instead, he claims they split into squadrons that circumnavigated the globe, charting the coasts of Australia, the Americas, and even Antarctica. In this scenario, the source maps for Piri Reis's depiction of the New World would not be Portuguese or ancient, but Chinese, products of the most advanced maritime technology of the age. The theory hinges on a crucial and plausible middleman, the network of Arab and Indian ocean traders. If a Chinese vessel or a chart from one made it to a port like Calicut in India or Hormuz in the Persian Gulf, that knowledge would have entered the bloodstream of Islamic commerce and scholarship. From there, it is a straight shot to the Ottoman Empire, which had deep political and economic ties across the Muslim world. A Chinese map showing a new continent across the Atlantic would have been a geopolitical bombshell, exactly the kind of intelligence an Ottoman admiral like Piri Reis would have coveted and used. On the surface, it fits beautifully. It provides a source that is technologically credible, historically proximate, and connected through viable trade routes. The timeline is tight but possible, with Zheng He's last voyage ending around 1433 and Piri Reis compiling his map 80 years later. Yet the theory crashes against the wall of mainstream historical consensus. no Chinese records and no archaeological evidence from the Americas support the idea of a Ming fleet crossing the Pacific or rounding the Cape of Good Hope into the Atlantic. The official records of Zheng He's voyages were largely destroyed by later emperors who turned China inward, but the surviving documents and the stone inscriptions erected by Zheng He himself detailed journeys throughout the Indian Ocean, not beyond. Scholars point out that the treasure fleets were immense logistical undertakings designed for diplomacy and display in known waters, not for open ocean exploration into the complete unknown. Their route followed well-established monsoon patterns and coastal hopping, a strategy utterly different from the blue water sailing required to cross the Pacific. Furthermore, if the Chinese had discovered the Americas and mapped them in detail, it would have revolutionized their worldview and likely spurred colonization or sustained trade, neither of which happened. China, with its immense resources, simply turned away. So while the idea of knowledge transmission via Arab traders is perfectly sound, the knowledge itself, the detailed American and Antarctic coastlines, likely was not in the Chinese cargo. The theory, however, forces us to confront a tantalizing what-if. It reminds us that the early 15th century was a moment of multiple, nearly simultaneous breakthroughs in maritime reach. While Portugal was inching down the African coast, China was dominating the Indian Ocean. The world was on the cusp of being connected, and maps were the currency of power. In the bazaars of Istanbul, a chart from a Portuguese caravel and a chart from an Arab dhow that had traded with a Chinese junk might have sat side by side on a merchant's shelf. Piri Reis, the ultimate compiler, would have cared less about their origin and more about the coastlines they revealed. So perhaps the truth is not a single source but a confluence. The map may be a mosaic where a sliver of data from a Chinese voyage to an unexpected land, misinterpreted and merged with Portuguese reports and ancient legends, created something entirely new. It is a reminder that history's greatest mysteries are often not locked doors but tangled threads, each one a possible path to a different version of our past. The parchment holds one last, deeply technical secret. To understand it, we must think like a cartographer facing the greatest challenge of all: how to flatten the round Earth onto a flat sheet. This is the problem of projection. Every world map is a compromise, a mathematical transformation that inevitably distorts shapes, distances, or areas. The familiar Mercator projection, for example, stretches landmasses near the poles to grotesque sizes. So what projection did Piri Reis use? When modern experts first tried to fit his map to a standard grid, they expected to find the typical warping of a 16th century Portolan chart, which was designed for navigation over limited regions, not for global accuracy. The results were baffling. The map did not fit neatly onto any known Renaissance projection. It was as if he had used no consistent mathematical system at all, simply copying his source charts side by side without adjusting them to a common framework. This in itself is telling. It suggests he was a compiler, not an original mathematical cartographer. He was pasting together pieces of a puzzle without a master blueprint. But then, researchers like Charles Hapgood took a different approach. Instead of forcing the map onto a flat grid, they attempted to plot its coastlines onto a spherical globe. What they found sent another ripple through the study. When the southern landmass, that controversial phantom continent, was plotted on a three-dimensional sphere, its distortions seemed to lessen. The bends and bays that looked so strange and stretched on a flat page began to align more coherently on the curved surface of a planet. This is a subtle but profound observation. It implies the original source map, the one Piri Reis was copying from, was not designed to be flat. It was designed with an understanding of the Earth's curvature. To create a map that transfers accurately from a sphere to a flat sheet and back again with minimal error requires more than artistic skill. It requires spherical trigonometry, the branch of mathematics that deals with triangles on the surface of a sphere. This is the math used by modern surveyors and astronauts to navigate in three-dimensional space. In the early 1500s, and certainly in the ancient world, this knowledge was in its infancy in Europe. Some Greek astronomers had grasped its principles, but applying it to practical, large-scale cartography was a monumental task. So here we face another anachronism, not of coastline but of conception. The map's geometry hints at a source that viewed the world not as a flat disk but as a globe, and knew how to represent parts of it with a mathematical fidelity that should not have existed. Think of it like tracing a pattern from a curved vase onto a piece of paper. If you simply press the paper against the vase and trace, the pattern will be distorted when you flatten the paper. But if you use a complex formula to transfer the pattern, accounting for the curve, the flattened version will still contain the correct proportions. The Piri Reis map in its most accurate sections appears to be a crude tracing, but the original vase, the source, seems to have been measured with that complex formula. This detail is often overlooked, but it is perhaps more damning to conventional history than any single coastline. It suggests the lost source civilization did not just have ships and explorers. It possessed the intellectual architecture to comprehend the planet as a whole geometric object and to translate that understanding into a usable chart. It is a fingerprint of a sophisticated scientific mindset, one that leaves no other obvious ruins except for these faint, perplexing lines on a piece of gazelle skin in Istanbul. The landmass might be a guess, but the geometry feels like a message. This map does more than chart coastlines, it charts the contours of our own curiosity. We are drawn to it not just as a historical artifact, but as a psychological puzzle. It speaks to something deep within us, a yearning for stories that lie just outside the official record. We are a species built on narrative, and the greatest narratives are those with a missing chapter. The Piri Reis map offers exactly that, a blank space on the timeline that our imaginations rush to fill. It is a siren song for the forbidden idea that our textbooks might be wrong, that grand civilizations could rise and fall without leaving a trace we recognize, and that the past holds secrets still waiting to be decoded. This is the core of its enduring power. It presents us with a mystery that is perfectly balanced, a set of scales that will never tip definitively to one side. On one pan, we place the weight of compelling, almost eerie coincidences, the alignment of a coastline with a hidden bedrock, the llama in the Andes, the citation of maps from Alexander's time. On the other, we place the heavy counterweight of rational skepticism, the errors in the Caribbean, the problem of longitude, the far more plausible explanation of Terra Australis. The scale trembles, but it never settles, and that is precisely what keeps us coming back. A mystery that is solved loses its magic. A mystery that is completely impossible is dismissed as fantasy. But a mystery that lives in the shimmering space between, that offers just enough evidence to be tantalizing but never enough to be conclusive, that is the perfect story. It invites participation. It allows you to choose your own adventure. Do you see a brilliant synthesis of Renaissance knowledge or a fragment of a lost world? Your answer says less about the map and more about you, about your appetite for wonder versus your trust in consensus. It taps into fundamental themes of human existence, the fragility of civilization, reminding us that libraries burn, empires drown, and knowledge is a flickering flame in a vast historical darkness. It whispers of the possibility that our entire understanding of human progress is a straight line drawn through a landscape of forgotten circles. This is why the debate will never die. It is not a puzzle to be solved, but a mirror to be held up, reflecting our perpetual desire to believe that the world is stranger, older, and more mysterious than we have been told. So the next time you look at those faded lines on gazelle skin, ask yourself, what are you truly hoping to see? Yet the debate has not remained trapped in dusty libraries. It has been launched into orbit, armed with satellites and ice-penetrating radar. In the late 20th century, a new tool emerged that promised to cut through the ice and the speculation, revealing the true shape of the continent beneath. Projects like Operation Icebridge, a NAS, a mission that flies radar-equipped aircraft over the poles, have mapped the subglacial bedrock of Antarctica with stunning precision. The resulting images are ghost landscapes showing the mountains, valleys, and coastlines that have been buried for millions of years. And when these modern radar topographies are placed side by side with the Piri Reis Maps' southern landmass, the comparison is visually arresting. Certain bays on the ancient chart seem to mirror indentations on the hidden coastline. A particular peninsula on the map appears to align with a subglacial ridge. For those who believe in a lost source, this is the ultimate validation, a high-tech echo from the deep past. It feels as though the satellites have finally uncovered the original template, proving the map was not a guess, but a copy of a geography we can now only see with million-dollar technology. The chill of that possibility is real. It suggests a civilization not only capable of sailing there, but of surveying it with an accuracy that we, with all our instruments, have only just matched. The alignment feels too specific to be mere chance, a pattern etched in ice and ink across an impossible gulf of time. But this is where a responsible examination must pause and look closer, because the devil, as always, is in the discrepancies. The most glaring omission is also the most telling. The Piri Reis fragment shows no Antarctic peninsula. This is the long, crooked finger of land that reaches up toward South America, the most distinctive and obvious feature of the entire continent. It is impossible to miss. Any ship sailing along the coast of Queen Maud Land, the area the map is often compared to, would eventually encounter this massive peninsula. If the source was a genuine survey of an ice-free Antarctica, the peninsula would be the centerpiece of the map, not a forgotten detail. Its complete absence is a deafening silence. Furthermore, while some coastal curves seem to align, the overall scale and orientation are wrong. The map compresses and distorts the distances, bending the coastline in ways that don't match the bedrock topography when viewed as a whole. The similarities that seem so compelling in isolated snippets often fall apart when you look at the entire shape. What the satellite comparison ultimately reveals is the powerful human tendency of pareidolia, seeing meaningful patterns in random data. Our brains are wired to connect dots, show someone two complex, wiggly lines, and they will inevitably find points where they seem to match. Proponents of the ancient map theory highlight these points of convergence, while skeptics rightly point to the vast stretches of divergence. The radar imagery gives us a definitive answer to what is really under the ice, but it does not and cannot prove that a 16th century admiral had access to that data. It only proves that if you draw a speculative southern continent with enough random detail, some of those details will, by pure statistical chance, resemble reality. The technology that promised to solve the mystery has instead deepened the divide, providing both sides with new evidence. One sees a confirmation written in bedrock, the other sees a coincidence magnified by hope. The map remains, as it always has, a Rorschach test on parchment, its true meaning lying not in the ink but in the eye of the beholder. Its journey from a scholarly footnote to a cultural icon began with a slow burn. For decades after its rediscovery, the Piri Reis map was a curio for historians of cartography, debated in academic journals but unknown to the wider world. That changed in the 1960s and 70s, an era hungry for mystery and questioning established truths. The map found its perfect evangelist in Erich von Däniken, whose 1968 book Chariots of the Gods became a global phenomenon. Von Däniken presented the map not as a complex historical artifact, but as a simple, stunning anomaly. He stripped away Piri Reis's own notes about Portuguese and Columbus maps, focusing solely on the southern landmass. In his narrative, the map's accuracy was impossible for humans of any era to have achieved. Therefore, it could only be the work of ancient astronauts, extraterrestrial visitors who surveyed the Earth from the air and left their charts with primitive mankind. The Piri Reis map became exhibit in this new mythology, a single piece of evidence used to prop up a vast speculative edifice. It was a powerful, seductive simplification. Gone was the messy reality of a Turkish admiral synthesizing sources. In its place was a clean, dramatic story of forbidden knowledge handed down from the stars. This catapulted the map out of academia and into the realm of pop pseudo-history, where it has remained ever since. It became a staple of late-night television specials and pulp paperbacks, its image reproduced alongside photos of the pyramids and Easter Island statues, all presented as fragments of a grand, hidden past. The map was no longer studied, it was wielded, a blunt instrument to bash the walls of conventional history. Later authors like Graham Hancock adopted the map into a different but related narrative. In works like Fingerprints of the Gods, Hancock wove the Piri Reis fragment into a tapestry of a lost, advanced Ice Age civilization. For him, it wasn't aliens, but a forgotten human culture wiped out by a cataclysm. The map was a surviving piece of their global cartography, a ghost in the machine of history that proved our timeline was wrong. Hancock's treatment was more nuanced than von Däniken's, often acknowledging the Portuguese sources, but he still placed ultimate weight on the Antarctic interpretation, using it as a cornerstone for his theory of a sophisticated source culture. In both cases, the map's true nature as a Renaissance compilation was sidelined. Its genuine wonder, the fact that a 16th-century Ottoman admiral could assemble such a cutting-edge view of the world from the shadows of espionage and the dust of ancient libraries, was lost. That authentic historical drama was not dramatic enough. It had to be transformed into a smoking gun for something grander and more apocalyptic. This cultural repurposing has had a lasting, distorting effect. For millions, their first and only encounter with the Piri Reis map is through these sensationalist lenses. They see it not as Admiral Piri Reis saw it, a working document of state intelligence, but as a cryptic message from a lost world or another planet. The map's actual biography, its connections to the age of discovery, the Ottoman-Portuguese rivalry, and the transmission of classical knowledge, is overshadowed by the myth. It becomes a symbol, an empty vessel into which we pour our own desires for a more mysterious past. This is its modern legacy, a double existence. In one room, scholars patiently analyze its inks and parchment, tracing the flow of information across the medieval world. In another, television hosts hold it up under dramatic lighting, asking if it rewrites everything we know. The map itself is unchanged, a silent piece of gazelle skin. But the stories we tell about it reveal less about the past and more about our perpetual need for the past to contain secrets just waiting to be found. The map's greatest gift may not be an answer, but a question that echoes through the centuries. Regardless of where you stand on its mysteries, the Piri Reis fragment forces us to confront the fragile nature of human knowledge. We build our histories on the documents that survive, the chronicles that were written down and passed along. But what about the stories that were not? What about the maps that crumbled to dust in a damp cellar, the sailor's logbook lost in a shipwreck, the library that burned on a forgotten Tuesday? This single parchment is a stark reminder that our timeline is built on a foundation of silence, punctuated by the rare, miraculous artifact that slips through the cracks. It whispers that the past is not a neat, linear progression, but a landscape littered with black holes, places where entire networks of understanding simply vanished. How many other admirals in how many other ports compiled worldviews just as sophisticated, only to have their work consumed by war, decay, or simple neglect? The map suggests that the ancient and medieval worlds were far more interconnected, and their scholars far more curious than our simplified histories often portray. A Turkish admiral cites Portuguese spies, a lost chart from Columbus, Arabic navigational guides, and Greek text from Alexandria. This is not a world of isolated civilizations. It is a web, fragile but real, stretching across religions and empires, where knowledge trickled through deserts on camel caravans and crossed seas in the sea chests of captured sailors. That web itself is a monumental discovery, proving that the desire to understand our world has always transcended borders. So perhaps the true lesson of the Piri Reis map is not about a specific coastline, but about the very process of how we know things. It challenges our arrogance. It asks us to hold our certainties lightly. In an age where we believe all information is at our fingertips, archived forever in digital clouds, the map is a humbling relic. It proves that data can be lost for 1,000 years, that a single surviving copy in an Istanbul palace can hold the key to reshaping a narrative. What else might be waiting, folded inside an unlabeled manuscript in a monastery in Armenia, or tucked behind a bookshelf in a Venetian archive? The map tells us that the quest is never over. History is not a closed book with a final chapter. It is an endless puzzle, and we have only found some of the pieces. The empty spaces on the parchment are not just missing land, they are invitations. They ask us to keep looking, to stay curious, and to remember that the past always has more to say if we are willing to listen. So the journey ends where it began, with a single, fragile piece of parchment. We have sailed from the life of Admiral Piri Reis, a practical man of the sea, through the labyrinth of his own notes. We have traced the logical threads of his Portuguese charts, the shadowy possibility of a lost Columbus map, the echoes of Ptolemy and Arabic navigators. We have then ventured into the stormier waters of speculation, where that southern coastline morphs into an ice-free Antarctica, pointing to lost civilizations, Earth-crust shifts, or even visitors from beyond the stars. And we have anchored again in the harbor of sober critique, where that same landmass becomes a simple mistake, a philosophical phantom called terra australis. Each path is paved with evidence, yet none leads to a definitive destination. The map's true power lies precisely in that maddening, beautiful equilibrium. It is the perfect historical paradox, a document grounded in the realpolitik of the 16th century, yet haunted by details that seem to float free of time itself. Its greatest enigma is not the ink on the skin, but the tantalizing, unbridgeable gap between its utterly plausible Renaissance sources and its few, startling, inexplicable accuracies. That gap is where wonder lives. It is a space the map forever holds open, a silent challenge to our neatly ordered past. Whether you see a brilliant synthesis or a fossilized fragment, the Piri Reis map remains a ghost image of lost knowledge. It is a permanent invitation to question, to investigate, and to remember that history is always a story we are still learning to read. What does the map say to you? Is it a masterpiece of its time or a message from another? The conversation is yours now. Share your theory in the comments below, and if you love unraveling mysteries like this, be sure to subscribe. Our next deep dive into the forgotten corners of history is just ahead.